Good evening. I'll call the meeting to order for the purpose of electing a chair and vice chair. If I could have a nomination for the position of chair at this time. Councillor Osanek.
I'll nominate Councillor Hutchinson for chair.
Okay, and is there a seconder? Councillor Neal.
Thank you.
All right, and Councillor Hutchinson, would you accept the nomination if you're elected? All right, are there any other nominations at this time? Seeing none, I'll close the nominations, and all those in favor that Councillor Hutchinson be elected, as he's working his way over here, and we'll now take nominations for the position of vice chair. Councillor Sanek.
I'll nominate Councillor Shell for vice chair.
And I will second Liz. I'm breaking the rules.
And Councillor Shell, would you accept the nomination? All right, seeing no other nominations, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries.
So, the call to order, the meeting to order, or at least the administrative side of it, and the approval of the agenda. Okay, I'll do that, yeah. Okay. Noting that the delegation has withdrawn for now. They won't be making a delegation. That's under what is now 6A. Okay. But the briefing is going ahead. So with that deletion, with that amendment, can I get a mover to approve the agenda? Councillor Sanek, and a seconder, Councillor Shell. All those in favor? Here, oh, wait a minute, hang on. Is there an addition or deletion or anything like that? Okay, I see a lot of studious looks over there. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, it passes. Okay, confirmation of the minutes of the ARC meeting of Thursday, October the 26th, 2017. Are there any, well, we need a mover first. Councillor Neal, seconder, Councillor Sanek. Are there any amendments or deletions, additions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? None against. Okay, that passes. Okay. Item 5, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Anyone making money off of starving artists tonight? Do you see any? No. Okay. So moving right along, the delegation has been canceled. So this becomes item 6. Okay. So what is now item 6A is a briefing from Danica Luckhead, Executive Director of the Kingston Arts Council, and Billy Ann Bailey, Board Chair, Kingston Arts Council, to speak to the committee on the Kingston Arts Council plan for administration of the arts funding for the City of Kingston. So, one of you would like to, you can do it from where you're sitting if you want, or you can come up to the lectern.
Okay.
It's up to you.
I think we prefer to sit, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Danica Lougheed, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kingston Arts Council. We are very pleased to be here to provide the ARCP Committee with a briefing on the 2018 Kingston Arts Council Plan for Administration of Arts Funding for the Corporation of the City of Kingston. As part of our service level agreement with the City of Kingston, we are required to lead an annual review of the City of Kingston Arts Fund. This review looks at ways to improve the program and includes consultation with various stakeholders, which include applicants and past jury members, as well as with our Board of Directors and the Arts Advisory Committee. This feedback is then taken into consideration in the revision of the plan for admin. Given that there is a larger city-led review of CCAF scheduled to begin in 2018, most of the changes made to the plan for admin this year are minor. Changes include clarification of language and additional detail on the responsibilities of the jury, the board, and the KAC. These changes are noted in detail in the report that you have in front of you. However, there are two larger changes that we'd like to just highlight for the committee tonight. The first being that the Executive Director of the Kingston Arts Council will take over responsibility of chairing the CCAF adjudication meetings. In the past, the chair was a member of the public selected by the Kingston Arts Council. The KAC's past role at the meetings was to take notes, document discussions and decisions, and respond to questions posed by the jury regarding the administration of the fund. After a review of best practices and considering both the Kingston Arts Council's increasing capacity and knowledge of the administration procedures, we have recommended this change for 2018. As chair of the meetings, the KAC continues to remain ex officio and will not participate in discussions about particular applications of funding recommendations. In addition to acting as chair, the Arts Council will continue to be responsible for documenting all discussions and decisions made at the meetings. And this will be the responsibility of our grants coordinator, Felix Lee, who is here with us this evening as well. The second change is in regards to increased oversight by the Kingston Arts Council Board of Directors when reviewing the adjudication report and final funding results. I'm going to turn this part of the discussion over to the chair of the Arts Council Board, Billy-Ann Belay, who can talk a little bit about this further.
Thanks, Danica.
Yeah, it's the red one.
Thanks, Danica. And good evening, and thank you very much for allowing us to be here today. I should say that the CCAF Fund for Administration is a terrific set of policies and procedures for running a granting program. However, it's the board, the KAC's board role to ensure that those policies and procedures are executed and implemented. And that's what we're strengthening by increasing the oversight of the board in those decision-making processes. So to that end, once the juries have taken place and they've made their grant recommendations, we've asked the staff to strengthen and slightly expand the report that the board gets so that we can do our due diligence as a board in approving the recommendations before they come to you for final approval. So what we mean by sort of expanding and strengthening the reporting is providing us with a few additional pieces of information. For instance, the last year's grant in the case of the operating program is a kind of crucial benchmark. The actual request from the applicant, which gives us a context for growth and all of that stuff, and then the cumulative score based on the assessment. And that cumulative score becomes a ranking in the context of the entire competition. So you see all the applications really in descending order, and then the final grant recommendation itself. Our job as a board is to look for the coherence between the score or rank and the actual grant recommendation. We're not there to pass any judgments on the assessment itself. We don't actually see the assessment comments. It's really just that coherence. Where that becomes actually also really a good tool for us is if, based on assessment, there's money moving around within the group of applications based on assessment, then we can be very clear about have the criteria been applied appropriately so that it's fair and equitable, what the final sort of grant recommendations will be. I can tell you that every arts council that runs granting programs has this kind of board scrutiny of grant recommendations at the point of approval. So we think it's a really beneficial sort of enhancement of the process for us. Thank you.
I'll just sort of finish it off just in terms of our briefing. Thank you, Billy-Ann. So again, those two major changes, for us, the goals for these is to really ensure that the Arts Council, the KAC plan for admin, does continue to be managed properly from start to finish, that there is full and meaningful participation by the jury members during the meetings, and that greater oversight and accountability exists in order to ensure the continued improvement of this critical arts funding program. And at this point, I just wanted to mention that the 2018 plan for MIN has been approved by the Arts Council Board of Directors, by the Arts Advisory Committee, and tonight we are seeking the approval of the ARCP of this report. Thank you.
Are there questions of the briefing, the presenters? Councillor Schell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In discussion about the board members now reviewing the final rankings, I'm sort of trying to figure out why, and is it, I'm presuming that members of the applicants for grants do not talk to board members
That's
about
correct.
that. So it really has nothing to do with board members at times feeling uncomfortable not having enough information.
No, and, you know, we really make sure, as I said, we don't see the assessment comments themselves. It's a small community, right? What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, yeah, and we don't see the unaggregated scores of each of the jurors, right? Because that's not the point either. We don't care about any of that. We need to actually be quite disinterested in the actual assessment. What we're interested in is the process and the integrity of the process. Does that make sense, Liz?
As much as I have understood the whole thing over the years. And just to do with the KAC staff taking over the chairing the adjudication meetings, I've forgotten, does the chair vote now, the chair of the applicant,
So this was,
just to break a tie?
yeah, so previously in the plan for administration, there had been language used around voting and non-voting members. And what essentially the process actually represented was that the decisions around funding allocations were a collective decision-making process by the jury. So the voting actually wasn't happening in those meetings. So essentially what's happened is that the chair was considered a voting member. It no longer is because we are ex officio. And the jury is responsible as a group to come to those decisions around funding allocations as a group. And so the actual voting doesn't take place. It's just language that describes who makes decisions and who doesn't. Do you want to add something?
Can I also say something about the move to have a staff person facilitate the meeting? It seems to me it used to be many years ago that in many municipalities, the system that was used was that a member of the community would be appointed to chair the meeting, and the staff were extremely hands-off of the process. That's changed over the last years. Even the Toronto Arts Council, the big municipal arts council, used to do it that way. They're all run by staff now, which is really important to the quality and, again, the sort of integrity of the process, to have a trained facilitator at the front of the room, managing the conversation, making sure everyone's heard, making sure that all the issues are evenly spoken about around the table. And sometimes you don't get that with people you really want around the table, but they actually don't have the expertise to facilitate. So that's the reason to improve the process.
Thank you. That's actually good to hear. I mean, I've seen that, an increasing professionalization of many things that had been volunteer-based, and that's
Yes,
often
indeed.
very good news. Thank you.
Great questions.
Councillor Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question related to the sort of rationale for that formal change. And I just first want to make a comment about what you've just said about a trained professional facilitator as opposed to a member of the public being appointed there, as has been the recent practice. And the point is that in these committees of council, it's a councillor that is generally appointed chair, and we are no different from members of the public. Like, we don't have any special training. So that makes me think that maybe our committee structure might one day hear the argument that the chair should be a member of staff and not a member of council. Just pointing that out. But my question had to do with So I had the privilege of sitting on one of these with Councillor Neal as an ex officio member, and I don't remember the distinction between the voting members and the ex officio members being really that relevant to the outcome. And I guess my question would be, is there any problem with the councillors that are there ex officio participating in the discussion vis-a-vis these tightening up of the processes that make things more professional and more consistent with the policies? Is there any problem with that part of the arrangement?
Well, I can comment. I was in that jury meeting with you, and I can comment a little bit on that, in that as in the plan for admin, the City of Kingston councillors are ex officio and that they don't make decisions around funding amounts. They are able to contribute to discussions around an application as it relates to the City of Kingston, but that really is where it should stop. I know there was discussion at the time about, everyone was sort of supporting each other in certain discussions around how to move money around, but the city councillors are not permitted to actually put forward decisions and recommendations on allocation of funding. And so that is the practice that we work with and that we will continue to work with. But the distinction that you're talking about, the ex officio versus the decision makers, it does come down to that second part of the adjudication meetings around actually sitting down and going through and determining funding allocations.
And based on assessment by peers, which are of the arts community.
Okay, and my second question has to do with just can you give us an example so we can wrap our head around it? An example, a theoretical example, make one up, where the current practice would be problematic with what the jury has come up with, and how the staff members reviewing it according to the new policy would make a difference. Just to give us like a practical example, a hypothetical one.
Sorry, for which change?
So the change of having the staff review the jury recommendations before they go to council and make sure that they're consistent with the policy?
The board of directors.
Right.
So so the final piece. I can give an example just and you can maybe add to this, Billy Ann, but as an example in terms of why the board, having the board review those final assessment scores correlating with the funding amounts can be beneficial. There's a couple of things that are happening. The board is, first of all, entrusting the professional staff to ensure this is happening at the meetings. So, for example, if we're in a meeting and the jury recommends an increase of funding to an organization, we then look at the correlating score to ensure that it aligns with our procedures. If, for example, an application receives a medium score and they receive an increase, we challenge the jury to provide us with rationale and justification as to why that's taking place, because that is maybe a shift away from the procedures that are outlined. So for us, it happens at that level in the meetings. What then the benefit of going to the board of directors is that they see this report that talks about the full process of the meetings, talks about what's worked, what's happened throughout the entire process of administering the program. And what they get to see at the end are the funding amounts, but they don't get to see that score. So they act as this sort of second check, this additional oversight to ensure that what the professional staff have been doing are in line with the procedures outlined in the plan for admin. So again, it's looking at each application that's received funding and not received funding to ensure that the decisions made reflect the scores. Another example is if an applicant received a low score of 1 out of 3, but they receive funding, then the board would be able to challenge the staff and say, explain to us why this happened and what the rationale of the jury was, so that they can, again, just ensure that the program is being administered with integrity.
So I agree with everything that Danica said, and I would say that the other really good reason for the kind of board scrutiny that we're talking about is sort of accountability. That if there is a complaint about a grant decision, we as a board have done our due diligence and can say and stand behind the decisions and the assessments of the peer process. And I think it's an important backstop for the staff. It means we have their backs, but we have their backs because we're informed.
So I'm almost done. So the board, when reviewing, are going to take minutes and hold votes on items that may be contentious if they come up? So that would be, you're talking about accountability, so you'll be able to point to the discussion at the board meeting with the minutes and the votes involved, or is it more of a sort of a consensus as a board?
Oh, no, there's a discussion, absolutely. But, we don't see our job as questioning the nature of the assessment. That's for the arts professionals in the room. We see our job as, exactly as Danica said, just ensuring that there is coherence, as I said, between what the ranking was and the grant recommendation.
Yes, we'll just have to see how it works if we pass this. Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Sene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question about the meeting schedule. So it used to be like all day Saturday, and I think all day Sunday, and I can't remember if Sunday actually did go all day or no, or not, but now it's going to be over 2 half days. So would that be, would it still be over the same weekend, half a day Saturday, half a day Sunday? And do you think that gives enough time to come to the conclusion, over those 2 half days?
Yes, so in the past, the adjudication meetings had taken full day Saturdays, and it was a 10 to 4 p.m. schedule, and same on Sunday. Just in the last couple of years that I've been at the organization, I did feel as though it was a very taxing schedule in that, the second half of the day, which is a very critical half of the day in terms of dealing with the actual allocation of funding, the energy in the room often struggled, and it needed sort of, from my opinion, a break. So yes, they will fall back to back, on whether it's on a Sunday or a Saturday, Sunday, or during the week, but they will take course over 2 mornings essentially versus in a full day.
And you think those 2 half days would give enough time?
It'll still be the same amount of time allocated, so it'll just be split up over 2 days. So instead of 10 to 4 p.m. on one day, it will be 10 to 1 a.m. on both days. Yeah.
Councillor Neal.
Just very quickly, and following up on that last question, I assume that you've had some communications with the museum granting board, which has 2 half days through the week. And personally, I think that's far better. We have some difficulty in getting people, especially people with young families, to commit to all day Saturday or all day Sunday. And I think it would be better to have the half day through the week. So that's just my comment, having been involved in both of those processes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? I have one. This sort of follows on Councillor Stroud's tact. So the real question, I think, from particularly a political point of view, is what if you have the project grant or operating committee come up with a decision, and then the board decides that's not the decision they're going to back. So then we have the seeds of a controversy and blowback, which soon arrives on our desks. So how is that going to be dealt with?
I should tell you that I worked at the Ontario Arts Council for 21 years, 11 as Director of Granting, and our board in those 21 years never overturned a decision like that because of the respect for the peer assessment process and because of the respect for the quality of the policies and procedures like CCAF behind that underpin the assessment process. So that's sort of all I can say. The only reason a board would want to overturn a decision would be personal ones, and those are not acceptable reasons to do so. The assessments are clear. the scores and the grant recommendation line up, there is no reason to overturn a decision. If something was inconsistent with the policies, then the board has a right to say, we need a redo. And then we would have to deal with that. But as far as I know, it's never happened at the KAC.
Thank you. The word redo is what I wanted to hear. So, okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll pass on to the item, what is now 7, the business. What's going on here? Plan for administration of the arts funding for the Corporation of the City of Kingston 2018. Does staff have something they wish to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, just by way of a brief introduction, because I don't want to retread a lot of what's been said. Very pleased to be able to bring this most current version of the plan forward. And as has already been outlined, this is an annual process that we go through, but I think one of the things that's become clear is what we want to do is instill in council the confidence of the process, and certainly in the time that I've been involved with this granting program, I've had the chance to work with 4 different executive directors of the Kingston Arts Council, and I think Danica Lougheed has shown tremendous leadership in terms of her role. So the shift that you've seen happening in terms of the role of the executive director vis-a-vis the facilitation of the granting process, I think is an excellent one at this time for the reasons that have already been outlined. And another point that I'll just raise is that in earlier versions of CCAF, the responsibility if a grant was challenged by a recipient or someone who failed to be a recipient of a grant, it went back to the chair of the grants committee to deal with. And we had a situation not too long ago where we had to go through that process. And again, this notion of professionalization, that you have someone who's tasked and very skilled at dealing with having to address that kind of issue, I think works much better when you have a professional staff person who's able to engage in that discussion. So I see that as a positive change as well, and I'm glad that Billy Ann highlighted the fact of her tenure with the OAC, the Ontario Arts Council, so I didn't have to, but I think it's to Kingston's advantage that we have someone of her experience in our community now who's involved with the Arts Council and brings such a long, rich history to the kind of program that we're doing. And I think what you're seeing here is that for the confidence of you and the rest of council that, you know, I participate ex officio in this process. So between myself and the Kingston Arts Council staff, we're being vigilant about the program. The board is now being more actively vigilant about the program, and you have the opportunity, hopefully, to feel even more comfortable with what ultimately comes to council's recommendations for granting out of this process. So that's all I'll say for now, unless there's questions.
Fair enough. Any questions of staff from the committee? Not seeing any. We go to the public. Is there anyone in the public have anything to say? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the briefing, the players. Very impressive presentation, very good report, and some good questions. I'll just say that I've got a high confidence in the way you are doing your work. I'm going to praise the structure and the detail of the document. Looks like you've examined a lot of eventualities, and they're defined clearly, and the best practices referenced. So I only have one suggestion. You've got a lot of detail in there, and it's really just a very minor thing. If you were able to find a way to add an actual graphic diagram to just show the interrelationship between the different parts of the structure, just so that someone can glance at it and get a feel in 5 minutes instead of spending an hour maybe reading through the report and understanding it. So it's just sort of the the science person in me seeing that. But for someone who's just coming into it, to be able to understand that, right? So as I say, I think things have really improved a lot, and you've got a very smooth running operation. And everybody in Kingston is, I guess, I'm all the better for the high quality work you're doing. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we come back to the committee. Councillor Neal moves the recommendation. Councillor Sanik seconds it. Discussion of the recommendation. Councillor Neal.
Just very quickly, I think this organization is doing a tremendous job, and I really appreciate the recommendations in this report. In a different millennium, I was on council, and we didn't have this kind of firewall between councillors and how we handled grants, and it was very problematic. And it's great being able to, our only job is to try to get you more money, but beyond that, I think this is a really good way to administer that. So when somebody phones to complain, we have a complaint process. If somebody tries to lobby me and I'm not on the jury, even if I'm on the jury, all I have to say is I'm an ex officio non-voting member. I'll take your concerns forward. And that's where it ends. And the idea of being an ex officio member, I'm quite comfortable with. I always say it doesn't stop me from having an opinion, but it makes me sit on my hands when it comes vote time. So, and I'm quite comfortable with that process. As to the idea that umbrella committees might end up with the recommendation of staff chairing those meetings, I don't think that will happen because we are very different. The umbrella committees are a very different organization than the grant organizations. So I totally endorse the recommendations and this. Thank you.
Any other committee member? Comments, questions? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? And it passes. Thank you.
And if I can just comment, I have to run because I ran over here from another emergency meeting for another committee I'm on, and they're about to lose quorum. So I have to run. I will say I endorse the other recommendations before us, though. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, on to 7B. This report received from the Arts Advisory Committee, which is one part, I believe, right? Yeah, and it's the appointment of public members to the Professional Development Working Group. It gives us a list of folks. I'll read it when time comes. Does staff have any introduction as to what the Professional Development Working Group is? What does it do? Who's represented here?
Yes, through you, thank you for that opportunity. This committee previously approved a mandate for the Professional Development Working Group, which was identified as an area of particular interest and focus for the Arts Advisory Committee. This group has been tasked with looking at what kind of professional development opportunities already exist within the Kingston community at various levels, and potentially to identify gaps where additional attention is needed, and to eventually bring forward some recommendations as to how we can address this issue of professional development from young emerging artists right through to senior, more professional artists and others in between. The working group does include members of the Arts Advisory Committee itself, including Danica Lougheed, as well as Tricia Baldwin from the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts and Jane Cargis from the Juvenis Festival. These people have been identified as community members to join this working group, and much effort, I can tell you, has gone into making sure it's a representative group in terms of discipline, ethnocultural affiliation, age, and other issues to try and make sure that the bases are covered off. And I know that they're keen and anxious to get to work on this initiative.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Not seeing any. Any? Yeah. Pardon? Okay. Okay. So the motion is that Angela Elster, Mark Garnis, Elizabeth Hess, Mariah Horner, Don Mitchell, Ashley Newton, Chantal Prudhomme, Georgina Rial, Dallin Robinson, and Michael Wheeler be appointed as public members of the Professional Development Working Group. Do I have a mover? Councillor Shell. Seconder, Councillor Stroud. So, any comments? Seeing none, I just say, I just wanted to say, I'm really happy we're doing this. Okay. As a small city, we have to punch above our weight. So we don't know where we're going or what other people are doing or what we would need to do if we had the resources or a quarter of the resources. And I say that for the benefit of staff. And then, you know, there's no real development to take place. And we've made huge strides, as Councillor Sanik will attest, since 2006 when we were first elected, when there was just over $100,000 available. So it didn't go far. So I think we're doing much, much better. And as you said, professionalizing it and getting our procedures in order. And it's done very well as far as I'm concerned. But I understand, and I think it was well explained why these improvements are probably for the best. So that's that. So I will call the vote on this motion. All those in favor? It passes. Thank you. Now we're to 7C, report received from the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee. And I wonder if staff have something they'd like to say about this.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a report that was reviewed by the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee already, as you can tell by this report, which we had undergone for this committee's understanding. About 4 years ago, we went through a large process the city did to reorient the entire homelessness system into an actual system. And as part of that, all the agencies that were successful in getting funding through the city to be part of the housing and homelessness system entered into 3-year contracts with the service manager. Those contracts ended on December 31st. We went through an extensive exercise with the providers. We also hired some outside assistance to analyze how successful those agencies were being, if they were meeting our mandate and our expectations, and if we needed to make any changes to the system. So this report, along with some other information, was provided to the Housing Committee as to the kind of the summary of our findings in many ways. Just some kind of real highlights. Since the inception of the new housing system, over 4,000 clients have been served in some way through either prevention diversion services or our emergency shelter system. We've seen a 17% reduction at least in shelter services. We've been able to close 2 shelters, and we've also seen great successes in getting people housed. We've had well over 200 households housed at this point in time that are really hard to house types of individuals. So that's been quite successful, and the reasons behind being able to close some shelters and reorient funding. There definitely remain some challenges, though, and areas for improvement, which was our purpose for going through this exercise. Certainly, backup overflow shelter options remain a challenge, which we're trying to deal with. Youth services is an area of focus that needs to continue to be an area of focus. And street outreach is a small program which is becoming more and more important, and a recognition that we need to keep that going, even though that was not part of the original system and has been something we've done on an interim basis over the last couple of years. So in terms of any system reorientation going forward, there's a couple of big items. First of all, the women's shelter had informed us, which is one of the reasons why, there's a number of reasons why this got delayed and we didn't have it done in time for the finalization of the contracts, is because some of these issues arose during our review. The women's shelter advised us they were no longer interested in providing shelter services. So we have, there's recommendations in this report, but we've also already undertaken an RFI process to find a new shelter provider for women in the city. Daytime services for women is a challenge because eFry, which is the agency providing that service, is no longer going to be part of the system. So what's going to be the long-term plan for daytime services for women? Housing liaison worker, there was a recognition that the rural area of the county and the city, we need to do a better job of finding apartments and other housing options for people facing homelessness in the rural area. So there's a recommendation to temporarily resource additional staff for that in the rural area. And another major area of change is addictions and mental health services. Has undergone, they themselves have had an amalgamation process going on and some major changes at their organization. They provide housing first services for us. They've informed us that they have to increase their budget by 26% to maintain that service, which is not a reasonable increase based upon council's budget that we've passed for 2018. So the recommendation is to RFP that service to determine if there's another agency that can provide that service. At the same time, we don't believe it needs to be exactly the same service, and there's some discussion about how we want to reorient some of those workers to do something that's more beneficial for the system. So we've entered into temporary contracts with all the homeless services for the next 6 months while we work our way through the council process here. So that it's relatively stable right now, but certainly if this report ends up going forward to council in this format, we'll be working with them to enter into new contracts going forward for presumably another 3 years. So happy to answer any questions. I will say the two members of my staff who deal intimately with homeless services are both sick today. So you have me to answer any questions, and hopefully I'm able to if you do have any.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Stanek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My one question was, page 8 of the report, and it was just that paragraph on overflow shelter options about motels, and I just wanted to know what that means. So I know that if when worst comes to worst, we will give a voucher for, send them to a motel. So just what does that last line mean, that this remains an area of discussion with shelter providers and remains a risk to the system? What does that mean? Like they're worried that we're going to send too many people to motels instead of putting them in the shelters so that they're not going to be full and receive that funding? Or like, what does that mean exactly?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, none of the funding of the shelters is related to the amount of persons staying in the shelters. That used to be the way we funded them. So now they just get base funding if there's one person in the shelter or 25 people. So they have no incentive to have more people. Actually, all our policies are trying to have less people in the shelters, clearly. But the reason why I can say definitively none of the shelters are in favor of the motel voucher program. And the reasons for that are they feel that a couple of things. First of all, the liability of it. who is taking the liability of sending someone to a motel and not having any supervision of those individuals while they're there? Secondly, they worry about how to actually have persons leave the motels. Who's in charge of making sure they actually just stay the one night or such? How will they determine what an appropriate person is that can handle living in a motel that won't have any liability issues? And lastly, it kind of works against what they're trying to do in the system overall. They're all trying to work towards having people be self-sufficient, move towards a stable lifestyle and a stable situation, which they have to have tough conversations with many persons. If people find out that rather than, if they get kicked out of the shelter, for instance, and there's a backup option that they can go to a motel, many people would see that as a beneficial option to, instead of staying at a shelter. So it works at odds with what they're trying to do, or they feel it could work at odds with what they're trying to do, and may be detrimental to the long-term situation of many individuals and the system if people want to work behind the scenes to be able to get to go to a motel on a given night. We know other cities do it. We've been researching how other cities do it. Clearly it can be done, but those are the reservations of the agencies that are our partners in it right now.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the withdrawal, Elizabeth Fry, for the women's shelter, I guess being new to the committee and to looking at these policies closely, should we be worried about this? And what is the likely uptake on that RFI? Are there lots of these types of agencies that might submit? Like, are we looking at sort of a like, is it just a formality finding another provider, or is this actually a little bit of a hurdle?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it certainly is a risk area. I can tell you, though, because since we've written this report 2 months ago now, we have completed the RFI process. And so I believe it would be appropriate for me to say publicly that Home-Based Housing has put in a bid to operate a women's shelter. At this point in time, we're working towards making sure it meets all of our expectations. But I can tell you that at a minimum, they have bid to, or bid is a strong word, but they have put a proposal in to have 6 women's beds in from the cold shelter, in addition to the beds that they already have. Which will also include them making one of the apartment units in that complex women's only as well, to make sure that they have a couple of options for women. They also have amended their policies at Lily's Place Family Shelter to allow women to stay there if they wish. And we are also working with EFRI to see if any of the beds that they don't want to have as a shelter long-term could act as the overflow in case we have too many women needing separate facilities in from the cold. So that's the proposal right now on an interim basis. I know Home-Based Housing also has plans to have a more long-term situation that might be even better for women. But at an interim model, we expect on May 1st, when Elizabeth Fry stops offering this service, that we will have this in place.
Yeah, so what you said there about the interim model and the longer-term model, I presume that has to do with the obvious follow-up, which would be when you're talking about women's shelters, having them at facilities that are general shelters, and then having separate, like, it's not really that simple. Like, it has to be somewhere where the women feel safe and so on. And that's the things you're talking about, making sure that they're able to provide that option and all of the requirements.
Yeah.
So I'm presuming that the permanent option would be fully able to comply, and the interim option might have a few issues that wouldn't be ideal. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think that word is ideal, correct. You know, that you're right, there's a long-term vision that they have and a better way that they can set up their facility to make sure it's a perfect situation. In the interim, that's what we're working through with them to make sure it's ideal in the interim and that it offers a safe environment for those women who need that type of environment. It's important to note, In From the Cold has always been sheltering women, and most nights has had women staying there. But certainly there's an expectation that there's a certain segment of the female population that needs to be served in a specific, sensitive way, that there's a safety factor and separation factor that needs to be taken into account. And their proposal does ensure that happens. But those are the details we're working through to make sure it meets our standards and the standards of the community. And they're working with EFRI and other women's agencies to make sure that that's going to occur.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that that one crucial part of the puzzle is the perception amongst the women that are at risk to need these services. The perception, the sort of word of mouth thing that goes around, how a reputation is formed and so on. If there's a situation where the separation isn't ideal and that becomes an issue, then it would quickly deteriorate the reputation, I guess, on the street. So I'm sure you're aware of what I'm getting at there. So anyway, I'll just leave it there.
Any other questions from the committee? I've got a couple. The first one is based on the street outreach, and I'm just interested in knowing what they're finding out there and why what they're doing is considered a success. I don't doubt it is. I've heard good things, but if you could give me some more information, just so I can be more conversant in it, I'd appreciate that.
Yep, certainly. The person who's operating street outreach actually did a presentation at the Housing and Homelessness Committee, I'm going to say 4 or 5 months ago now or something, and where they actually have done surveying and such, and they had some very good statistics about what they have accomplished, and a lot of it is from a basic perception perspective, it's hard to tell what the difference they're making because, of course, there's still people living on the street, and that's a tough one for them. Their goal is to make sure they're reaching out to all the persons who are staying not sheltered. That's their goal. To form a relationship with them, to understand why they're not coming in for certain services that we're offering, and to try to continue to meet with them until they are able to accept services. Many of the people that they are finding are already connected to services in some way, and they're just choosing not to take advantage of the shelter service portion of our services. But they have statistics, and I won't want to say them off the top of my head, but they have been successful in getting a certain percentage of those persons into shelter services. Not all, certainly, but the best part of their service is being able to assure the public and others that they have reached out to every individual that comes to their attention. And whether it's people on Princess Street, at Davis Tannery site, on other areas of the city that we become known out in the West End even and such, they are making contact with every person to make sure why they're not coming in for services, to make sure that they know of the services. The majority they've also done surveying of the downtown situation, at least twice, and found that of the people panhandling, over 60% of the people are actually housed. So it's not always a connectedness. They did that largely for the business community as well and have been working with the business community. And they do a lot of things at request of people calling them to express concerns that there's somebody staying, in a certain location. So that's the best way I can answer that, Councillor Hutchison. I hope that gives you a little bit of background. They had a couple of interns isn't the right word, but staff given to them from corrections for a couple of months to try to even make sure they were going around even more often than, and I'm not sure that's going to be possible in 2018 again, but that's how they did it in 2017. They had 3 people essentially reaching out. And we've included it in the municipal budget for the second half of 2018 if addictions and mental health can't continue to fund it.
I got a bit confused, perhaps. You indicated that Addiction and Health Services indicated they wanted 26% more funding to supply their program. Did the RFI, or maybe perhaps I missed this, I thought you said RFI about home base. Is that who's replacing them? Or perhaps I'm mixing up 2 programs.
There's 2 issues going on that we're doing an RFP for. One was for the women's shelter, so we did that separately, which Home Base Housing was the only organization that put in a proposal to us. The second thing we will do, which we have not done yet, is do an RFP for the Housing First, a portion of the Housing First program that's offered by AMHS. Right now, Home Base Housing also offers that same program. They run about half of it, and AMHS has the other half of it. So we will be RFPing the AMHS portion of it to see what other agency would like to offer this service.
Thanks. That was good to know. I got lost in the thicket there. Okay, any other questions from the committee? So, sir, go ahead.
Sorry, again, because I'm a newcomer and I didn't think to research this myself. Can you just quickly tell me, Addiction and Mental Health Services, KFLNA, is that similar in their overall funding is mostly provincial? Is that not the case?
They get the vast majority of their funding from the LIN.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and they're having a problem delivering the services under the current contribution that the city gives them.
That's correct. This is a program that they operated only via the city funding. It's not meant to be funded by the LIN as part of their organization. It's a program that as an organization, they decided to bid on 4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago now, because they wanted to offer the service, but they offer the service only because they're getting the City of Kingston funding.
Right, and the service, there's no synergy there with any of the other programs that they get provincial funding for. So like, it's something that's 100% its own thing, and that's why they can't make it work, or what?
Certainly, I don't want to speak for the organization, but we've pursued that same question, certainly as a service manager, and their answers have been they need whatever it is, $139,000 additional to be able to offer this service. They've seen their labor contracts go up significantly when they've harmonized labor contracts across their new organization, and that's the explanation they've provided to us. Now, there is a possibility they can submit a bid as part of the RFP, and it will be $139,000 higher than what we're currently spending, and if no one else submits a proposal, we'll have to consider that. But we want to make sure we're seeing what the market bears to see if that's an increase that is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, are there that many providers that can actually provide this service? I mean, I'm pretty hooked into the housing system, and I'm scratching my head at the moment. You know, I recognize the usual names, and some have gone out of business, right? That might have had the expertise or the abilities, and you know, when we close the shelters on, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that it's been going like this, right? And there's some benefits to that too. It's not just negative, right?
Yeah, that I know it's just a comment, but that is a concern that we have as a service manager too. And while home-based housing is an excellent partner, and we greatly appreciate you know, them being a partner of the city, it is a risk area when we're putting more and more services potentially with that one organization. And fortunately, it's a very well-run organization that wants to be a partner with the city, but you know, at a very good cost. But that's a risk area. But you never know when you do an RFP. We just did the RFI portion for the new Ontario Early Years Centers and got 3 bidders who had never even been part of that program to submit an interest as the RFI. So you never know, but it's certainly a risk that we could potentially be putting another program into the home-based housing area of responsibility, which is not perfect. You know.
Right, and we then open ourselves up as as a whole, as a corporation, as being more of a single source provider, and then, you know, it's just part of Kingston, I think, because we're not that big. You know?
It provides a lot of level of credibility for the city when we are the system, when we have more partners. When Elizabeth Fry is another shelter, it just provides some credibility that, you know, there's more involvement across the city, and that we might lose that. So,
Councillor Stanek.
Thank you. It just occurred to me, like, about losing the Elizabeth Fry, you know, for women's shelter. If this had happened 2 years ago, before everything happened with Dawn House, like, we couldn't have foreseen that this would happen with Elizabeth Fry. So I was glad to hear that Dawn House didn't apply, since now they have their new mandate and they've already moved into their new location. But if they hadn't have moved and stayed where they were and everything was the same, they could have been in contention the night to help with the beds that Elizabeth Fry is giving up as part of, you know, acting as a women's shelter, you think?
yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that would have been a possibility, and certainly we had sent the RFI to Dawn House to see under their new facility if they were interested in also providing that service. But yeah, that's an unfortunate set of circumstances, I guess. And E-Fry, to their, you know, to their existing staff's credit, there has been some turnover in their leadership, and I think a recognition that they maybe didn't know what they were getting into entirely by running a shelter. It's not an easy business to be in by any stretch, and so they've had 3 years now under their belt to know what the problems were, and so fortunately they provided us with, you know, kind of 8-month lead time for this decision, so we could have a backup. But you're right, that might have been a possibility if we were 2 years ago knew about their concerns.
Thank you. No opportunity for the public, if you want something to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you to Mr. Laidman for the report and all of the detailed explanations. I've really been learning a lot from this. And I think I have to congratulate staff and council on their deep concern on this area for the last several years and the progress that you've made. So great to see. We still have a ways to go. So I got some questions that really weren't dealt with in the round so far. So my first one, you know, so your report is from mid-December, and since then we've had a lot of severe weather in Kingston. Now I know the media in Toronto have been covering the situation there, with the shortage of beds and the impact that they've had. They had to open an armory, and there's a lot of discussion around that. So I didn't see discussion in the Kingston media about how things are going here. So I'm just wondering if you have any updates. Like when it's minus 26, it's hard to survive outside. If it's minus 5, maybe you can if you have a good place to hide somewhere or you're resourceful. So if you have any updates on that. So my second point is, with your success, I'm wondering if you're making available your strong points that you're finding are working with other jurisdictions, like you're sharing information with them, they're sharing information with you, that kind of thing. I'm sure that goes on. My third point relates to an item that was at council this week, meeting on Tuesday night, where there was discussion of the vacancy rate in Kingston and where we're going with that in terms of which projects are coming on the market and how that's impacting the prices of apartments, right? Because this doesn't seem to be any developers who are actually building housing for the so-called, at-risk or on-the-edge people on the affordable housing side, or say smaller units with lower prices. So we're getting into sort of a crisis situation there. So that's a huge concern of mine, because we have another cohort from Queens, their new residences coming in the fall. We've had a lot of projects held up at the OMB, and we're having new factories that are being built in Kingston that are going to have new employees, right? So it's all going to put pressure on the housing market. And we're hearing that Queen's Park is going to be bringing in new legislation on affordable housing. I'm not sure where that is, and maybe I'd like to see an update on that if you know anything. My fourth point has to do with some very recent media coverage, which was linking spending on social services with healthcare. There was a major report done on this. I think both the Star and the Globe had, some lengthy media coverage on that in the last week. I'm not sure if people have seen it, but I've got it and I can make it available. Maybe I can talk to the clerk and then bring it in and put it on the record if you haven't seen that. So I think it's very interesting to see. And I think it ties in, with this council being very progressive, taking a lot of strong measures to help those who are at risk or struggling with life in terms of bus service and that kind of thing. So I think Kingston is on the leading edge there, and council and staff need to be very proud of that. And then I guess my last point touches just a little bit on one point that was already raised, and we've had an increase in the Ontario minimum wage, which I'm very happy to see. And then there's another increase coming in as of the start of next year. And I'm just wondering if there's been analysis done on the impact that's going to have on the costs of the providers in this sector. So I appreciate that we don't have all those answers right now, but just want to have the items of discussion thrown into the mix so that it'll impact future work. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I can touch on a couple of those answers. First of all, in December, where we saw the severe weather, I can report that there was not a single night in December that all shelter beds in the city's system were full, occupied. So there was always flexibility in the system, availability in the system. We also met with all the shelter providers to go over their policies and look at whether they needed to make new provisions if it was extreme cold weather, to, if people had been banned from the shelters, to lift those if it was extreme cold weather, which they were all very flexible to do. So I believe we had a good response to that, but there has not been any time period during the cold weather that we have been full in our shelter system, which hopefully that remains the case. Vacancy rates, I know that was at council the other night, and I think that it was quite an extensive report, but certainly all of our homeless system, lot of it is predicated on moving people from homelessness into housing as quickly as possible. And anytime the vacancy rate is so low, it makes it very difficult to find apartments in general, let alone for those on social assistance who only have, between $400 and $600 a month to pay for rent. I would point out that you might want to go online, Frank and Mr. Dixon, and see, I believe yesterday the province announced inclusionary zoning provisions to try to address some of the affordability. That was one of their announcements this week. And certainly I know the planning department at the city will have to be going through that announcement to see if that's something the city of Kingston will be taking advantage of or not. And lastly, I definitely know the whole sector of nonprofit agencies are concerned about the minimum wage because certainly even though we mandated in our housing and homeless system that they were to pay a certain wage at a minimum, that wage is very close to the new minimum wage, and anytime you get that kind of compression between that, there'll be an expectation of workers to receive additional wage increases. So that's definitely on their radar to be concerned about, but we have not seen a concern when we're going to enter into new contracts. We believe we'll be able to enter into contracts within the envelope of funding that council has made available to us.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Would someone care to make the motion? You don't have to read it. Councillor Stroud, you're moving it? Seconder, Councillor Schell. Any comments? No? All those in favor? Passed. Okay, do we have any motions? Seeing none, moving along. Notices of motion, seeing none. 11, other business. 12, correspondence. 13, date and time of the next meeting is scheduled for March 29th, 2018. So we're now on our every second month program. Do we have a mover for adjournment? Councillor Schell, second by Councillor Sanik.